Welcome to Donnybrook. Next up, and our guest tonight is Congressman, or former Congressman, John Shimkus, who represented the 20th, the 19th, and the 15th District in Illinois over a 24-year span without ever moving. 3 districts. Pretty impressive. How are you?
I'm great.
And of course, co-starring founder Bill McClellan. Well, let me ask you, Congressman, to start off, given what's going on this week in your old,
right now,
right now, in your old workplace, how much do you miss being a congressman on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being ecstatic that you're gone, and 1 being sad.
Probably a 7. Yeah, I'm happy. We've all been to positions in our lives where we know it's time to move on. We've done kind of all we think we can do, and maybe either want to smell the roses or do a few other things. So timing was right. I'm glad. I don't miss weekly flights to D.C. I don't miss 6-hour car rides in my district, as I represented a third of the state of Illinois. You know, I did miss being in the chamber when President Zelensky addressed our country and its elected representatives, because I've done a lot of Eastern European stuff. It's very important to me. I've been watching it very closely, and that would have been a kind of a historic moment that I would have liked to have been there.
We talked about that when you were last on, Bill.
Well, what's going on in Washington now, John? And what do you think is going to happen, and who is going to be the next speaker?
Yeah, so I was there yesterday, flew back last night for some other business. The timing was just there, and I'm really close. I mean, 24 years, you make friends on both sides of the aisle, and so I didn't get a chance to visit to very many of them, but you know, the Constitution's pretty clear. I mean, it's clear that they have to get a speaker, but then all this other stuff about how do you organize, how do you bring bills to the floor, that's all based upon what the chamber votes on as a rules package, and you hear that later. See, I'm a consultant, right? When the House is in session under rules, then consultants or lobbyists like me can't go on the floor. It's against the rules. Well, there's no rules right now because you don't have a speaker.
That's right.
So I saw some of my friends, they said, why didn't you go on the floor today? I said, well, I can't. They said, oh, no, there's no rules right now. So you could have. So they have to, you know, the Republicans eventually have to reconcile this. Now, Republicans had a vote in their conference, overwhelming majority for Kevin McCarthy. But per the Constitution, a majority of members on the floor of the House have to vote for the Speaker. So these 20 are holding, really, the Republicans hostage and have a list of demands that sometimes you think they may be accepted. Some of those that I've been hearing will not be acceptable to most of the members.
Well, what's going to happen? What do you think? Kevin McCarthy is going to be the speaker in a day, 2 days, or will they have to go elsewhere?
I think they'll have to go elsewhere. I think Kevin will eventually have to say, I can't get this done. But see, his supporters are institutionalists and people who like him and people who have worked with him versus these 20. Not all these supporters really love him, right? But they're part of that. This is a team. The team made the decision. But so Kevin, I think, is going to have to eventually say, for the good of the team, we need to look elsewhere. And then all these other folks become free agents, kind of, and then they'll gravitate towards someone, you know, a governing conservative, but also is not. A lot of this is just bad blood, hatred, old harms that they are now just gigging Kevin for.
Would you be voting for Kevin McCarthy?
I would be, yeah.
I thought so.
I'm a team player.
Yeah.
You know, that's what the majority of the Republican Party decided in a vote, and then I mean, that's...
You know, you were a history teacher before you went into politics, as I recall.
That's right.
And I keep hearing that, you know, gee, we haven't had this kind of a fight since the 1850s, before the Civil War. As a historian, how bad are things? I mean, are we on the edge of another civil war, or is it better than it sounds?
I think there was another time, 1923. It's interesting.
Yes,
that
yes,
was.
but it wasn't.
It wasn't as long.
Right.
But why I like that, because that's Joe Cannon from Illinois.
Okay.
He's from Danville. I used to represent Danville. He's a big name there. But it was another type of hard-nosed and an uprising by the membership. I have full faith and confidence in our founding fathers and the documents. And history, the country's been through really tough times.
Right.
A civil war, a Great Depression, unjust and unfair, and eventually unsupported wars. We'll get through this. But I think we can't have this Pollyannish view that I'm a Christian by faith, so sinful human beings we can't create a perfect government. We're just not going to do it. So we just got to struggle through it.
To follow up on Kevin McCarthy, assuming he isn't the choice, do you have any, and I know you're not in a position to predict, would you think that it's going to be a Republican member of Congress, or there was talk of going, because technically you could be a candidate, for example.
My wife would kill me, but...
are you an active candidate? Is that why you're there?
That's right, I'm trying, yeah.
Okay, no, I'm serious. Do you think it's going to be an existing member of Congress?
I think it will, and I think it'll be a Republican.
Right.
I mean they can go two ways, right? Kevin can eventually say, okay, I can't get there for the good of the party, and then they'll gravitate to... The other way that Kevin could try, all he has to do is pull together votes, either by Hakeem Jeffries telling some of his colleagues, okay, you don't have to show for this vote, just then lowering the numerical threshold, or cutting a deal and getting some Democrat votes. Now you'll lose Republican votes.
Is that a viable possibility, do you think? I mean, the Democrats would want things like joint subpoena power so that Republicans couldn't just wantonly do that. They'd probably want some assurances on not having the government shut down, I would guess. Would you agree that most of I heard one of the Republicans actually talking about this on cable today, that the Republicans are going to mostly be in a position to message with their legislation, because the things they want to do, most of the agenda is going to not make it to the floor of the Senate, and vice versa.
Correct.
So is that how you view this as well?
I do. I really fear for this issue on the debt limit, right? Because these 20 could then even hold, the House hostage on that.
Right.
So governing is going to be very, very difficult. And this is just a prelude. So then I've been talking to a lot of people the last couple of days. I've served with a lot of speakers. Most Republicans.
You go back to what, Gingrich probably?
Go back to Newt. He came in when I got sworn in. He had a five-seat majority, very similar to this environment. And there was questions. I was asked, are you going to vote for him or not? And I didn't know. I didn't know all the details. And then I finally did. I'm a team player. That's kind of what the Republicans did. But look, he left scarred, right? Denny Hastert served a long time, but he left because we lost the majority, and then he had his other issues. And then you have John Boehner left scarred. Paul Ryan left scarred.
That's four.
We had another one who was running, Livingston, who stepped down the day that we were going to vote for him.
He had problems.
So
you've seen a couple.
Not like a Nancy Pelosi who really has survived.
Yeah.
You mentioned Paul Ryan. I saw a book cover the other day of Eric Cantner, Paul Ryan, and McCarthy, the three young knights.
Young guns.
Yeah, young guns of years ago. What's happened?
Well, America, you guys are observers of Missouri is a perfect example. Southern Illinois is a perfect example. The dynamics of identification with parties have changed. Where Southern Illinois, Missouri was a very competitive state and elected Democrats. Now labor, rural, guns, life, social issues have all gravitated to the Republican side and has really changed the dynamics. Now, it's also gerrymandering. You talked about my three districts. And both sides do it. I'm not saying one's over the other. But when you have these super partisan districts where they're, in essence, they're R27, Republican 27, which means you're always going to elect a Republican, or like the St. Louis one here with Cory Bush, it's always going to be a Democrat. So then the really emotional far left or the far right, they seize those elections, and that's kind of where we're at.
Let's talk about the nature of how the new guard, whatever you want to call it, the new folks have changed this. I think an underestimated fact of these 20, I don't really, whatever you call them, Freedom Caucus folks, and they only represent half of the Freedom Caucus.
That's right, there's
and
more
you were
there.
not a member of the Freedom
I
Caucus.
was not.
But they represent half. But of them, 5 of them, fully 1/4 of them, this is their first act in Congress. They're freshmen. They literally haven't even been sworn in.
Right.
Before they get sworn in, they voted against the Speaker. Right. How, and you served 24 years. In the first 12, 0 of these 20 were there. 0. The first one of them, was 2 or 3 of them got elected in 2010. Most of them have been, I think, almost all of them have been elected since Trump came on. So the question is, how you don't know them as well, I'm assuming, as some of the McCarthy group.
Right.
How, what does this say about the future of Congress that we've got these new folks that have really gone in a different direction, whatever you think of them?
I have no idea.
Okay, no, that's fair.
I mean, I just...
It is different.
We have a two-party system here. It's not defined in the Constitution. It's evolved over time. It works. You got to join a team. Both parties want to have a big tent, right? But it seems like this group, it's easier to be in the minority when you're always bitching and complaining, right? You know, when you have to govern, that means you have to compromise. And the other change is that when I started, we had newspapers and local media, and we had I had 5 papers on my side of the river, whether it was the Bella paper, Edwardsville, Collinsville, Alton, I mean, and I would have to go to them, drop off press releases. Now, it's all national coverage, and these people can raise money nationally by being crazy.
Yeah. Hey, as a historian again, John, how is history going to remember the Trump era in the Republican Party?
Well, as a lot of people who follow me, as you know, I've not been a big fan.
Right.
I did vote for him twice, so I'm not going to hide my credentials. I can tell people why, but I was always aghast at his personal behavior. And I also really got turned off on, remember, I was there under Bill Clinton. And impeachment was, you know, Republicans were saying, character matters.
Right.
And then we no longer say character matters on this. I really struggled with that. I understand how a rich guy who has a gold high-rise in Manhattan can appeal. I think it's because the rural poor, which I represented, feels that they've been left out, and they've been talked down to by the elites of the metropolitan areas. And you know, and the presidents I've served with, both Republicans and Democrats, personally, I've had a good relationship. Bill Clinton was nice to me, Barack Obama, George W. Bush. Trump's always been difficult for me to relate to. But it's, you know, when you say and you talk about, you know, guys grabbing their guns and grabbing their Bibles and mock their lifestyle, you lose them. And I think that's what happened. At least, remember, I have Southern Illinois. Everywhere, Springfield, Illinois, in the center of the state, south. My biggest city, my last district, was Danville with 33,000 people.
Right.
So I think that's where, you know, Democrats have to kind of find a way to attach back to the rural areas. Republicans have to start winning back in the suburbs, and they can't do it by what we see right now.
Do you think Trump will get the nomination in 24?
I think he's recently seriously damaged. And really, when he came out, I think a really testing point was 2 days ago.
Right.
When he said, Kevin's fine, vote for him.
Not one vote.
Not one of them.
Not one vote.
He didn't turn one vote.
And that was his folks,
and members were scared of him because he could turn elections.
Yeah.
And he did in primaries, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of this.
You've identified, I think, irrefutably, the thing that's driving people apart is are the effects of gerrymandering. And I don't think there's an inch of moral high ground for either party. I mean, Illinois Democrats and Missouri Republicans are equal in terms of if they have the power, they will gerrymander shamelessly. That happened. It just does. The question is, back to your historian hat, is what would bring us back? I think if you talk to the majority of Americans just across party lines, a majority of them would like the parties to work together more. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. But there's no pay window to working together. And in fact, as you point out, these 20 congressmen are literally fundraising off of their efforts to their attacks on McCarthy right now, all of them. And I guess my question is what would be the path back?
Well, and they're not going to get punished by their constituents.
Not.
In fact, they may even rise.
They're going to make money,
not just money, but they'll probably raise in their vote totals because of the way the districts are drawn.
Absolutely.
So my first district was the old Congressman Dick Durbin's district, and when he ran for the Senate, I ran for his seat and won. And it was competitive. So I had to be, if you're going to represent your district, you got to represent everybody.
Right.
So I think that gives you a chance to more clearly hear the second opinion and maybe moderate the way you talk, the way you approach. But when you're in a stronger drawn district, you'll still hear those voices, but they represent nobody, right?
Exactly.
They have no voting block to really, I was always respectful. I would meet with everybody, but to do what they would ask me to do would harm me in primaries or my next election.
Right.
I think, so Iowa has, the public needs to have referendums if they have that allowed in their state and push constitutional amendments for fair maps. I think that's the fix.
Hey, John, turn to Ukraine for a moment. Last time you were on the show, you were talking about Ukraine, and you had visited Ukraine, and you served in the army in Germany. You're knowledgeable about this. What's happening with Ukraine, and are the Republicans going to continue to support Ukraine? What's going on over there?
Yeah, I follow it closely. My heart breaks and weeps for the loss on both sides. But you've heard me the last time I was Putin. That is not unexpected from a dictatorship, and that's what he has in the Russian Federation right now. And he can't stop, because if he stops, he's out of power. And so that's why Zelensky's right. They have to win on the battlefield, and they need Western support. There are voices, that we hear in the Republican conference. They're small, like this group. They will not affect Republican support for Ukraine.
That was my next question. Our Missouri Senator Josh Hawley was the lone vote in the U.S. Senate against admitting Sweden and Finland to NATO, which we don't need to call him names, but his affinity for Vladimir Putin is rather stunning, really. I mean, or at least his willingness to do what Putin wants to do. And I don't mean to put you in a bad spot as a Republican, but I mean, can the Republican Party at least be counted on to keep its sort of traditional skepticism of Russia that has been there for our entire lives?
The answer is yes. I mean, you're always going to have voices. You have Rand Paul also, who's an isolationist, and he's a friend. I've met Senator Hawley a couple times. I would disagree. I'm a big NATO supporter. Putin uses it as a boogeyman in this, but it's a defensive alliance. In fact, 10 or 15 years ago, there was talk about Russia joining NATO if it's a defense alliance. So Putin miscalculated. Finland and Sweden now obviously are doing all they can to get in. Anybody who wants in, who meets the requirements, who can help us defend themselves, we should welcome them with open doors.
Is Ukraine going to get through the winter? I mean, what do you see happening on all this, John?
They'll get through the winter. The question is when the ground freezes, if it ever freezes. They haven't had their hard freeze yet. So tanks need to be able to move on that. They can't get bogged down in the mud. and then they'll have to thaw. They have to wait for the thaw, and then the ground hardens because of the summer, and then there'll be more. I think Zelensky wants, tanks, and he wants more air cover. I mean, this indiscriminate bombing of schools and hospitals and residential areas, the world should be outraged. And I think most of the world is. I think the greatest thing that we've seen is how Europe itself has rallied in support of Ukraine. I don't think I don't think Putin expected that.
No. And you think Ukraine can win on the battlefield?
I think that they can keep from losing, which means I don't think Putin will ever get in Ukraine. I think could be a stalemate. I mean, Zelensky's really hard in line now. He wants all that territory back,
right,
which means Crimea and the Donbass, Luhansk, and I support that. But he's going to have to beat Putin on the battlefield, and they're a much larger country. The Ukrainians have just blown the socks off of any analyst on how they were able to defend themselves.
I got to bring it closer to home, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You're an acting school principal. Where are you?
I'm at Holy Cross Lutheran in
Okay.
Collinsville, Illinois, the school I went to, my dad went to, and my kids went to.
And I don't know of any more noble profession than what you're in, but it's also one that has been politicized in
Yeah.
your party. This talk about critical race theory that a lot of us, we'll say my side of the fence, can't identify where it's actually being taught, and what it actually is. What is your what's your reaction to this being an issue? Do you think there's a fundamental problem with public education or private as to how we teach history?
Yeah, so I'm a proud Collinsville high school grad too, and so friends there. I live a mile from the high school. Was at a basketball game there locally. I think because of COVID, and I think because of the educational standards, I think more parents are now getting involved, which they should. We elect our local school boards. We want parental involvement, and but I do think a lot of people, because of what's being said, if they can, the private and parochial schools are growing in population because of this. Whether it's true or not, it is driving parents to try to reclaim some control, which I think they felt they lost through COVID and through whatever, trying to figure out what's being taught in the classroom. Good way of not answering the question.
I was just going to say,
I still have the
I was going to say, you haven't lost your former skill set. You didn't answer that like a school principal. All right.
Speaking of the old style, here in Missouri, we're talking about the Democrats, who are we going to get to run against Josh Hawley? And some people say, hey, maybe we could get Jay Nixon. And you are a retired politician. Do you miss it at all? And do you think, what's the chance of getting a retired person who seems happy in private life to go back on the campaign trail?
Well, in fact, I met Jay a couple times, and I actually met him when he lost one of the races. We were at the Science Center or something, and I had my kids, he had his kids. Now his kids are old, my kids are old. There might be an entry when your kids are out of the house, but I tell you, I mean, I was driving around 33 counties in southern Illinois and flying back and forth to Washington. A U.S. senator has a whole state. Of course, they got 6-year terms, so they don't have to move as fast as a House member would have to. But I think it would be very difficult for someone to encourage me to jump back in, and it'd be very difficult for them to convince my wife that this is something that we should do.
Right.
Which they apparently would have to do, not necessarily in that order.
Yeah, probably not in that order.
So can we get to make news? Do you have any candidate that we can get out of you so we get next up on the news that you think, a name of any person in the conference that you think might be a viable alternative?
Yeah, I'm biased because I'm close to some of these folks, but I think you could look at any level of leadership that is not a hell no by this group of 20.
Right.
So my roommate and close friend is Steve Scalise, a compelling life story, especially since being a member of Congress.
Right.
He has been 100% totally loyal to Kevin.
And
with no indication of anything other
Right.
than I'm with you down to the end. But he would be an attractive, should Kevin decide, I can't do it anymore, I think people would look at Steve or Patrick McHenry, maybe a Tom Emmer. You know, they're not going to take someone who's, I know Donald has been, you know, voted for a couple times, but he's only a second termer.
he's first term. He's freshman.
Oh, freshman from
So
Florida.
he hadn't even been there.
Yeah, so, you know,
How
that's
about the New York woman, Stefani?
Maybe second.
Elise Stefanik.
Yeah.
She's in leadership.
Isn't that disqualifying to these conservatives? They're saying. I heard one of them say, you know, that the same problem with your friend
Steve.
Steve. Yeah. That he was in leadership.
Yeah, no, I think that.
Is that?
Yeah.
Somebody think of you could think of.
Yeah, but remember,
that's it.
if you could, I mean, you might be able to get 16. You may lose 4 votes that way, but then you could still make it. So
We're just about out of time, and we respect to that you, you know, we really thank you for coming on
Oh, you're
and doing
welcome.
this. And I guess when I saw you today, I said, "You're still congressman?" He said, no, but would you like to be? Seems to be the title principal. Seems to
well, at
suit
least
you
right
well,
now.
right?
Well, the kids are great. I just came straight from a 7th grade basketball game, which we won, and there's a tournament going on. But you know they.
Okay.
I'm a disciplinarian, so there's a little tighter ship.
Okay.
But they are really good kids and caring families, and they're all over. I mean,
All
they're
right,
all
John.
over.
All right, John Shimkus, thank you so much
You are
again for
welcome.
coming in again, and you're welcome here anytime.
Thank you very much.
For all of us at Donnybrook, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.